The year is 1600, while Shakespeare writes his greatest plays in London, while the Tokugawa shogunate consolidates power in Japan. Something extraordinary exists in the deep forests of Minnesota that most of the world knows nothing about. The 7 council fires of the Lakota people gather each summer along sacred lakes where wild rice grows thick and eagles nest in ancient pines. This is a civilization, and I use that word deliberately, that has perfected the art of living in harmony with one of the most challenging environments on Earth. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if these history tales fascinate you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Now there's something about the moment before everything changes that haunts historians. That suspended instant when people are living their lives, completely unaware that forces already in motion will shatter their entire world. For the Lakota in 1600, that moment is arriving on 4 legs, moving north from Spanish Mexico like a whisper of revolution. But before we get to that transformation, we need to understand what's about to be transformed. Because the Lakota world that exists in these Minnesota forests, it's something that deserves our full attention. Picture the lakes themselves. Water so clear you can see 20 feet down. Wild rice growing in beds that stretch for miles. The stalks heavy with grain that women harvest from birch bark canoes. These canoes, let's pause here because they're worth understanding, are technological marvels. Made from birch bark sewn with roots and sealed with pine pitch, they're light enough for one person to carry, flexible enough to bend with impacts instead of breaking, and completely watertight. Every seam, every curve, every measurement represents centuries of accumulated knowledge. We're not talking about primitive technology. We're talking about engineering that solves problems through elegant simplicity. The young men hunt on foot, and here's something that blows my mind every time I think about it. They run deer to exhaustion. A healthy human can outlast almost any animal on Earth in a long-distance chase. The deer is faster in a sprint, sure, but a trained Lakota hunter can track and pursue for hours, sometimes days, until the animal literally cannot run anymore. This isn't just physical endurance. It's tracking skills passed down through generations, understanding of animal behavior, knowledge of terrain, and mental toughness that would make modern ultramarathoners look soft. Women are harvesting wild rice in late summer, processing it in ways that seem simple until you try to do it yourself. They parch it over fires to dry the hulls, then thresh it by dancing on it in special moccasins, then winnow it by tossing it in the air and letting the wind carry away the chaff. The result? A grain that can be stored for years, that's nutritionally complete, that tastes good, and that can be prepared dozens of different ways. They've turned a wild grass into a staple crop without agriculture, but it's the social structure, the kinship system, where things get really interesting. The Lakota organize their entire world through an intricate web of relationships that dictates everything from marriage to warfare to who gets the best cut of buffalo meat. You're not just a person. You're someone's son or daughter, someone's cousin, someone's aunt or uncle, someone's potential mother-in-law. Each of these relationships comes with specific obligations, specific privileges, specific ways you're supposed to behave. Let me give you an example. A Lakota man has a special relationship with his mother-in-law. He cannot speak to her directly or even look at her. Now, before we dismiss this as superstition, think about what it actually does. It prevents the kind of mother-in-law conflicts that plague families across cultures. It enforces respect through formality. It creates a social buffer that keeps extended families living together peacefully. Multiply this by dozens of different relationships, each with its own rules, and you have a system that maintains social harmony without police, without courts, without written laws. Children grow up surrounded by this network of relationships, learning their place in what the Lakota call the great hoop of existence. Grandmothers tell winter stories, and winter is the only time for certain stories, because stories have power and must be told at the right time. These aren't just entertainment. Their education, history, philosophy, and spiritual teaching all wrapped into narratives about Iktomi the trickster spider, about the white buffalo calf woman, about the time when animals could speak and humans had to learn their place in the world. And here's what gets me about these stories. They're not static. Each grandmother tells them slightly differently, emphasizing different lessons based on what the children need to learn. The stories adapt while maintaining their essential truth. They're alive in a way that written text can never be, changing just enough to stay relevant across generations while preserving knowledge that goes back centuries. Now, into this world comes the first harbinger of total transformation. One autumn day, we don't know the exact year, probably sometime in the early 1600s, traders from the south arrive at a Lakota camp with something no one has ever seen before. Strange beasts that carry men like willing slaves. Larger than the biggest dog by far, fast, powerful, alien. The Lakota name them Sunka Wakan. Holy dogs. Sacred dogs. Mystery dogs. Because what else do you call something that seems like a dog, but clearly isn't? Something that changes the rules of everything you know about movement, about hunting, about war. Think about what this moment means. For thousands of years, humans in North America have moved at the speed of their own feet. You can run fast for short distances. You can walk all day carrying a reasonable load. That's it. That's the limit of human mobility. The dog helps. You can load supplies on a travois and let dogs drag it, but dogs are small. They tire, they can't carry much, but a horse changes physics. A horse means a warrior who could travel 20 miles in a day can now travel 60. It means a hunter who could carry 50 pounds of meat can now transport 300. It means warfare transforms from running, battles between groups of men on foot, to lightning raids by mounted warriors who strike and vanish before you can react. The Spanish have been in Mexico since 1521. For 80 years, horses have been breeding, escaping, being stolen, moving north through indigenous trade networks. The Spanish tried to keep them from native peoples, understanding instinctively that horses equal military power. But you can't stop technology once it starts spreading. Escaped horses form wild herds. Captured horses get traded. Knowledge of how to ride, how to breed, how to train them. It moves from tribe to tribe faster than the Spanish can track. And the Lakota, here's what makes them special. They don't just adopt the horse. They master it with an intensity that staggers the imagination. Within a single generation, these people who have hunted on foot for centuries become some of the finest light cavalry the world has ever seen. Not good, not competent. The finest. Young warriors who once ran deer to exhaustion now fly across grasslands faster than eagles dive. The buffalo, previously hunted with patient cunning, with careful stalking, with drives off cliffs, now they fall before mounted hunters like grass before a scythe. A skilled rider can bring down a dozen buffalo in a single chase, guiding his horse with his knees while firing arrows so fast they blur. And these aren't random arrows. Lakota hunters learn to put an arrow through a buffalo's ribs and into its heart while riding at full gallop. They do this consistently, repeatedly. It's not luck. It's skill developed through years of practice that begins in childhood. Boys learn to ride before they can walk properly. By the time they're teenagers, they can hang off the side of a galloping horse, using its body as a shield, shooting arrows under its neck with deadly accuracy. As the Lakota master this new power, something else happens. They start moving. The forests of Minnesota are beautiful, but they're limiting. The lakes are rich with wild rice, but they're stationary. Horses need grass, need space, need room to run. And to the west, beyond the edge of the forests, lie grasslands that seem to stretch forever. Visions start coming to medicine men. Dreams of endless grass, where buffalo darken the earth from horizon to horizon. Prophecies about the people spreading across the plains like fire across dry grass. The sacred pipe that white buffalo calf woman brought, the pipe that sits at the center of Lakota spiritual life, it seems to point west, so they begin to move. Not all at once, not in a single migration, But family by family, band by band, the Lakota start leaving the forests of Minnesota and pushing onto the Great Plains. They're not the first people there. The Arikara, the Mandan, the Crow, the Cheyenne, they already occupy these lands. They have their own territories, their own sacred sites, their own claims going back generations. The Lakota don't care. They have horses now. They have mobility. They have warriors who can ride circles around foot soldiers. And they have something else, a hunger for expansion that the horse economy creates and sustains. Because here's the thing about horses, they need grazing land. The more horses you have, the more territory you need to support them. And horses equal wealth, equals military power, equals status. So you need more horses, which means you need more land, which means you need to take it from someone else. This is the transformation. In 1600, the Lakota are forest people, living in relatively small bands, hunting on foot, gathering wild rice, occupying a limited territory they've held for centuries. By 1700, just 100 years later, they're becoming masters of the plains, mounted warriors ranging over hundreds of miles, accumulating horses by the hundreds, pushing other tribes out of territories they've occupied since time immemorial. The Spanish horses have done more than change transportation. They've changed the entire basis of Lakota society. The economy, the warfare, the social structure, the spiritual practices, everything begins to reorganize around the horse. The people who were are becoming something new. The thunder that once rumbled over Minnesota lakes now rolls across endless grasslands. And other nations tremble at its approach, but they don't know, they can't know, that the horse is both their greatest gift and the beginning of their tragedy. Because the mobility that makes them masters of the plains will also make them targets. The wealth that the buffalo economy provides will make them obstacles to American expansion. The warrior culture that the horse enables will bring them into inevitable collision with another expanding power that sees the plains as empty, space to be filled with farms and cattle and railroads. In 1600, all that lies in an unimaginable future. Right now, at this moment, the Lakota are on the verge of their greatest age. The thunder is rising, rolling across sacred waters, gathering strength. What comes next will be glory and tragedy intertwined so tightly that they become inseparable. A golden age that contains the seeds of its own destruction, a triumph that leads inexorably to catastrophe, and it all begins with a mystery, with holy dogs, with the moment when everything changed and no one could imagine just how far those changes would go. By 1750, something extraordinary has happened on the northern plains. The Lakota have transformed themselves into the most formidable military power between the Missouri River and the Rocky Mountains. And I want to be clear about what that means. We're not talking about a loose collection of bands who occasionally fight together. We're talking about a sophisticated military organization that can field thousands of warriors, coordinate complex operations across hundreds of miles, and systematically dominate tribes that have held these territories for generations. How does this happen in just 150 years? How does a forest people become the terror of the plains? The answer is both simple and complex. Simple because it comes down to mastery of horse warfare. Complex because that mastery requires a complete restructuring of society from top to bottom. Let's start with the warrior societies, the Akichita. These aren't just fighting groups. They're the police force, the military command structure, and the social glue that holds Lakota bands together during their constant movement. Each society has its own traditions, its own songs, its own standards of courage and honor. The Kit Fox Society, the Crow owners, the Strong Hearts. Young men compete desperately for membership because being a Kichita means you matter. It means you have a voice in council. It means when you speak, people listen. And here's what makes the Akichita effective. They maintain iron discipline when it counts. During the great buffalo hunts, when hundreds of warriors want to charge ahead and claim glory, the Akichita hold everyone back until the moment is right. Anyone who breaks ranks gets beaten with coup sticks. Anyone who scares the herd early loses their horse, their weapons, gets their teepee cut to pieces. Harsh? Absolutely. But it works. The Lakota can coordinate massive hunts involving thousands of people and hundreds of horses without descending into chaos. This discipline translates directly to warfare. When Lakota warriors attack, they're not a mob. They're executing coordinated tactics that would impress cavalry commanders from any nation. Feints to draw out defenders, pincer movements to cut off retreat, false retreats to lure enemies into ambush. The kind of maneuvers that require trust, training, and leadership. The economic foundation for all this military power comes from the buffalo. And I need you to understand the scale we're talking about here. The great herds of the northern plains number in the millions, not thousands, millions. When they move, the sound of their hooves is like continuous thunder. The dust they raise can be seen for 50 miles. They darken the earth from horizon to horizon. That's not poetic exaggeration. That's what witnesses actually saw. A skilled Lakota hunter on a good horse can kill a dozen buffalo in a single chase. Process that for a moment. 1 man, 1 hunt, 12 buffalo. Each buffalo provides about 500 pounds of usable meat, plus hide, horns, sinew, organs. Nothing goes to waste. That's 6,000 pounds of meat from a single afternoon's work. One hunter can provide for multiple families for months. This creates unprecedented prosperity. When your best hunters can provide more food than your camp can eat, you free up enormous human potential. Young men who might otherwise spend all their time hunting can instead perfect the arts of war. They can practice riding for hours every day. They can train with bows until they can shoot 20 arrows per minute with deadly accuracy. They can perfect the art of counting coup, touching an enemy in battle without killing him. The ultimate demonstration of courage. And counting coup, this deserves its own discussion because it's so foreign to European concepts of warfare. The Lakota warrior who kills an enemy from a distance with an arrow, he gets recognition, sure. But the warrior who rides up to that enemy, touches him with a coup stick, and rides away, that man gets an eagle feather. That man's deed gets sung about at councils. That man's name becomes legend. Now here's why this matters militarily. This system creates warriors who are individually brave to the point of recklessness. Men who will charge into gunfire to touch an enemy. Men who see death in battle not as tragedy but as the highest honor. When you're fighting people with that mindset, people who literally view warrior death as the best possible fate, you're facing something that firepower alone can't overcome. The women's economy operates in parallel and is equally sophisticated. They're processing buffalo hides into leather so soft you can barely believe it came from an animal that weighs a ton. They're creating beadwork of such intricate beauty that it takes hundreds of hours to complete a single shirt. Quillwork using dyed porcupine quills, flattened and sewn in complex patterns, so fine it seems made by spirits rather than human hands. These aren't just decorations. They're wealth. They're tradable goods worth horses, worth guns, worth European manufactured items. The teepee itself becomes a marvel of engineering that deserves more respect than it typically gets. This is portable architecture perfected over centuries. In summer, you roll up the bottom edge and it becomes a breezy pavilion. In winter, you drop an inner liner that creates an insulation layer, and it becomes warm enough that people sit comfortably in freezing weather. You can set one up in 15 minutes with practice. You can strike it in 10. And it's completely waterproof when properly maintained. Think about what this mobility enables. A Lakota band can move their entire village, hundreds of people, thousands of items, all their possessions, 20 miles in a single day. They can follow the buffalo herds wherever they go. They can retreat from danger or advance toward opportunity with a speed that makes them almost impossible to pin down. European armies are still figuring out how to move supply trains efficiently, and the Lakota are moving entire cities across the plains. At the spiritual heart of this golden age stands the sun dance. And I need to be careful here because this ceremony is sacred, and there are aspects of it that the Lakota themselves don't share with outsiders. But the basic outline is known. And it's important because it shows how the Lakota merge physical suffering with spiritual power in ways that will prove both their greatest strength and their tragic vulnerability. Warriors pierce their flesh, usually their chest or back, with bone skewers. Rawhide ropes connect the skewers to a sacred cottonwood tree at the center of the dance ground. For hours, sometimes days, they dance while tethered to the tree, pulling against the skewers, staring at the sun until visions come. The pain is extraordinary. The endurance required is superhuman. But through this suffering, individuals transform into something more than human. They receive visions. They gain power. They become conduits between the physical and spiritual worlds. Crazy Horse receives his vision of invulnerability. Here, the prophecy that bullets and arrows will never touch him as long as he doesn't take spoils from his enemies. And for his entire life, through dozens of battles, he's never wounded, not once. Whether you believe in prophecy or think it's selective memory doesn't matter. What matters is that Crazy Horse believes it, and that belief makes him fearless in battle, which makes him incredibly dangerous. Sitting Bull sees soldiers falling upside down into his camp like grasshoppers from the sky. Years later, before the Little Bighorn, this vision will convince thousands of warriors that victory is ordained by the spirits, that the blue-coated soldiers arrayed against them are already dead. They just don't know it yet. This merging of spiritual and physical, it's not superstition to the Lakota. It's how the universe works. The spirits are as real as the grass, as tangible as the buffalo. When a warrior prepares for battle by painting sacred symbols on his body, by singing his death song, by wearing his medicine bundle blessed by holy men, he's not engaging in ritual. He's loading his weapons. He's putting on armor. It's practical preparation for combat, and it works because he believes it works. And that belief makes him fight with a courage that European soldiers find literally incomprehensible. The trade networks that the Lakota control by 1750 stretch thousands of miles. Their dominance of prime hunting territory gives them leverage over European goods flowing across the continent from multiple directions. British traders from Canada come south with guns, metal tools, wool blankets. American traders from St. Louis come north with the same goods, competing for access to Lakota buffalo robes and beaver pelts. The Lakota sit in the middle of this competition and play it beautifully. They pit the British against the Americans. They threaten to trade exclusively with one side if the other doesn't offer better terms. They demand gifts, substantial gifts, just for the privilege of trading. And they get away with it because both European powers want Lakota alliance. The British want the Lakota to fight against American expansion. The Americans want the Lakota to allow passage through their territory. The Lakota want guns, and they're willing to make promises to both sides that they have no intention of keeping. By 1840, the Lakota dominate territory from the Missouri River to the Rocky Mountains. Let me put that in perspective. We're talking about modern-day North Dakota, South Dakota, northern Nebraska, eastern Wyoming, eastern Montana. Hundreds of thousands of square miles. Some of the richest buffalo hunting grounds on the continent. Territory that other tribes, the Cheyenne, the Arapaho, the Crow, have held for generations. The Lakota take it. Not all at once. Not through single decisive battles, but through relentless pressure over decades. They're more mobile than their enemies because they have more horses. They're better armed because they control better trade routes. They're more aggressive because their expanding population needs more territory. Tribe by tribe, the Lakota push their neighbors to the margins or absorb them entirely. The Cheyenne get pushed south and west. The Arapaho follow them. The Crow retreat to the Yellowstone River Valley and fight desperate rearguard actions to hold what's left. The Mandan and Arikara, village peoples living in permanent earth lodges along the Missouri, get raided constantly, their corn stolen, their horses taken, until smallpox epidemics in the 1830s devastate them so thoroughly that they cease to be military factors. And here's what's crucial to understand. This Lakota expansion creates enemies everywhere. By 1850, the Lakota are surrounded by tribes who hate them. The Crow, the Pawnee, the Arikara, they all have scores to settle, relatives to avenge, territory to reclaim. When the Americans finally come in force, they'll find willing scouts and allies among every tribe the Lakota have displaced. The very success of Lakota expansion plants the seeds of their later isolation. But in 1750, in 1800, even in 1840, those consequences seem distant and abstract. Right now, in this moment, the Lakota are living their golden age. Warfare brings glory. Hunting brings prosperity. Children grow up strong. The people multiply. The sacred pipe passes from keeper to keeper, and the ceremonies continue unbroken. Medicine men have visions of a future where the people spread across the plains forever, where the buffalo never diminish, where the old ways continue for generation after generation. They don't see what's coming. They can't see it, because what's coming is so far outside their frame of reference, so completely alien to their experience, that imagining it would be like asking them to imagine the internet or nuclear weapons. What's coming is not another tribe with horses and arrows. What's coming is industrial civilization. What's coming is railroads and telegraphs. What's coming is an economy that doesn't depend on buffalo, that in fact sees buffalo as obstacles to be eliminated. What's coming is a military power that can replace casualties faster than the Lakota can inflict them, that views war not as a test of individual courage, but as industrial problem-solving. The first hints arrive in 1849, when gold is discovered in California and 50,000 Americans start crossing the plains each year on the Oregon Trail. But these are just travelers, just people passing through. Surely they'll pass through and leave the land as they found it. Surely the great herds will continue forever. Surely the spirits that have protected the people through all their transformations will protect them through this new challenge. These aren't foolish assumptions. They're reasonable extrapolations based on everything the Lakota have experienced. They've faced challenges before, new enemies, new diseases, new technologies, and they've adapted. They've thrived. They've conquered. Why would this time be different? But it is different. It's different in ways that won't become fully clear until it's far too late. The iron roads are coming. The buffalo hunters are coming. The blue-coated soldiers are coming with their cannon and their howitzers and their repeating rifles. And the warfare that the Lakota have perfected, the mounted charges, the counting coup, the individual glory, all of it is about to run headfirst into artillery shells and coordinated firepower, and military technology that makes courage irrelevant. The masters of the endless grass are about to learn that mastery means nothing when the grass itself becomes a battlefield, when the buffalo disappear, when the entire economic and spiritual foundation of their world crumbles. But that's coming. Right now, at this moment, the thunder still rolls free across the plains, and the people who ride it are still invincible. 1849. Gold is discovered at Sutter's Mill in California, and within months, the trickle of Americans crossing Lakota territory becomes a flood. 50,000 people in a single year. Think about that number. 50,000 Americans dragging wagons, driving oxen, shooting game, cutting trees, fouling water sources, all moving through the heart of the buffalo ranges like a bleeding wound across the prairie. Young Lakota warriors sit on hills and watch these wagon trains pass. The lines of white-topped wagons stretch for miles, moving slow as glaciers, but just as unstoppable. The warriors count them, try to understand them, and what they see makes no sense according to their experience of the world. Where are all these people going? Why are they crossing land they don't want to settle? And most troubling, why are there so many of them? The Lakota have fought other tribes for generations. They understand warfare as a test between groups of roughly equal size, where skill and courage determine the outcome. What they're watching now is something different. This isn't an enemy. This is a migration on a scale they've never imagined. And it keeps coming. Day after day, week after week, month after month. More people than they could kill if they killed 100 per day for a year. The wagon trains eat the grass. Literally, The oxen and horses pulling the wagons graze for miles on either side of the trail, consuming grass meant for buffalo. The emigrants shoot buffalo for sport, taking tongues and leaving carcasses to rot. They cut down every tree within reach for firewood and wagon repairs. The Oregon Trail becomes an ecological disaster zone, a strip of depleted land cutting across the plains like a scar. Chiefs like Red Cloud and Spotted Tail tried diplomacy first. They go to Fort Laramie in 1851 for a great council with American representatives. Thousands of Indians gather, Lakota, Cheyenne, Arapaho, Crow, Shoshone, tribes that normally war with each other, now brought together by concern about American encroachment. The American negotiators spread out maps and draw lines and make promises. The Indians will allow Americans to pass through their territory unmolested. In return, the Americans will pay annuities, goods delivered every year as rent for the privilege of using the trail. The buffalo will be protected. The Indians can keep their lands. Everyone signs papers. The chiefs mark their X's on documents they cannot read, trusting in American honor. And here's the tragedy. Some of these chiefs genuinely believe the Americans will keep their promises. They've seen American military power at the edges of their territory. They've heard about the Mexican-American War, where the United States conquered a third of Mexico in 2 years. They're trying to navigate an impossible situation through diplomacy, giving a little to keep a lot. It's not foolish. It's the best option they can see given the circumstances. But the Americans aren't negotiating in good faith. They can't be, because the promises they're making are beyond their power to keep. American settlers don't recognize Indian land rights. State governments don't respect federal treaties. The American military doesn't have the manpower to police the trail. And nobody, not the treaty makers, not the chiefs, not the emigrants, can predict what's coming next. August 1854. Near Fort Laramie, a Mormon emigrant discovers his cow is missing. He finds it in a Lakota camp, already butchered. The cow has wandered into the camp and been killed for food. This happens sometimes, usually gets resolved, with the emigrant receiving compensation in horses or robes. It's annoying, but not a crisis. Except this time, Second Lieutenant John Grattan decides it is a crisis. Grattan is fresh from West Point, 23 years old, full of theories about Indian fighting and absolutely convinced of American military superiority. He's been heard saying he could conquer the entire Lakota nation with 10 good men. Now he's got his chance to prove it. Grattan takes 29 soldiers, an interpreter who's drunk, and 2 howitzers to arrest the cow's killer. When he arrives at the Lakota camp, Chief Conquering Bear comes out to negotiate. Conquering Bear is a peace chief, a man who has staked his reputation on maintaining good relations with the Americans. He offers horses as compensation. Multiple horses, more than the cow is worth. Just take the horses and go, he says. Let's resolve this peacefully. Grattan refuses. He wants the man who killed the cow arrested and turned over for American justice. Now think about what he's asking. He's demanding that the Lakota violate their own sovereignty, their own law, their own sense of honor, to satisfy American legal principles they never agreed to follow. Conquering Bear tries to explain this. The man is a guest in his camp. He cannot simply hand him over. Take the horses, please, take the horses. Grattan orders his men to load their weapons. The Lakota warriors who have been watching from nearby positions see this and prepare for battle. Conquering Bear makes one last plea. The tension is so thick you could cut it. And then Grattan gives the order to fire. The soldiers' volleys kill Conquering Bear and several other Lakota. And then the hills explode with warriors. 600 men who have been watching this confrontation unfold now pour down like an avalanche. Grattan and his entire command, all 29 soldiers, die in minutes. They're overwhelmed so quickly they barely have time to realize what's happening. The warriors don't just kill them, they annihilate them. Bodies get pinned to the earth with dozens of arrows, mutilated, scattered. The aftermath of the Grattan massacre, and notice it's called a massacre even though the Americans fired first, sends shockwaves in both directions. The Lakota know they've crossed a line. You don't kill American soldiers and expect no consequences. But many young warriors feel vindicated. See, the Americans aren't invincible. They bleed and die like anyone else. Their guns didn't save them. Their howitzers didn't save them. When they're outnumbered and surrounded, they die. The American response takes a year to organize, but when it comes, it's devastating. General William Harney, a man who earned his rank fighting Seminoles in Florida swamps and Mexicans at Vera Cruz, leads 1,300 soldiers to punish the Lakota. Harney is not interested in diplomacy. He's not interested in distinguishing between hostile and peaceful Lakota. He's interested in teaching a lesson through overwhelming violence. September 3rd, 1855. Harney's force finds a Lakota camp at Ash Hollow in Nebraska Territory. It's a peaceful camp. Families going about their daily business, led by Little Thunder, a chief who wasn't even present at the Grattan fight. Harney doesn't care. At dawn, with no warning, his soldiers attack. The Lakota fight back desperately, but they're caught completely off guard. Women and children flee toward the hills. Harney's cavalry rides them down. Soldiers fire into tippies without checking who's inside. By the time it's over, 86 Lakota are dead, most of them women and children. 70 more are captured, women and children, who will be paraded through military posts as trophies of war. The Lakota give Harney a name in their language: woman killer. It's not a compliment. It's a statement of disgust, of recognition that this man wages war in ways that violate every code of honor they understand. Warriors fight warriors. That's how it's supposed to work. What kind of man makes war on women and children? But here's what the Lakota are learning. The Americans don't fight by warrior codes. They fight to terrorize, to break will, to make the cost of resistance so high that submission becomes the only rational choice. For every American soldier killed, they'll kill 10 Indians, 20 Indians, 100 Indians if necessary. And they don't distinguish between hostiles and friendlies, between warriors and innocents. An Indian is an Indian. The pattern is set. Lakota warriors attack soldiers or emigrants. Americans retaliate against the nearest Indian camp, regardless of whether those specific people were involved. The cycle escalates. Trust evaporates. The chiefs who advocated peace lose credibility. The warriors who want to fight gain influence. The middle ground, the space where negotiation and coexistence might be possible, disappears. Sitting Bull is in his 20s during this period, and he's watching everything. He participates in his first battles against American soldiers, and what he discovers is both encouraging and troubling. The Americans are tough fighters when properly led, but they're also vulnerable in ways that traditional Indian enemies aren't. They rely on supply lines that can be cut. They build forts in exposed positions. They send small patrols that can be ambushed. Their soldiers are often immigrants who barely speak English, led by officers who bought their commissions and have never seen combat. But the Americans also have advantages that negate traditional Lakota strengths. They fight in formations that make counting coups suicidal. They have rifles that can kill at ranges where arrows are useless. They have cannon that can destroy tippies from distances where the defenders can't even see who's shooting at them. And most importantly, they keep coming. Kill 100 soldiers and 200 arrive to replace them. Win a battle and lose the war because the Americans have endless reserves of men and materials. The Oregon Trail traffic continues throughout the 1850s, but now it moves under military escort. Forts spring up along the trail: Fort Kearny, Fort Laramie, Fort Hall. Each fort is a statement of American permanence, a base for military operations, a symbol that the Americans aren't just passing through anymore. They're establishing infrastructure. They're putting down roots. Young Lakota warriors raid constantly, stealing horses, killing isolated travelers, attacking supply wagons. These aren't coordinated military operations. They're individual actions by warriors seeking glory and horses and revenge. And they're effective at making life difficult for travelers, but they're not stopping the emigration. If anything, each raid justifies more military presence, more forts, more soldiers. The American Civil War, beginning in 1861, briefly reduces pressure on the plains. The army withdraws soldiers to fight in the east. Forts operate on skeleton crews. The Lakota get a 4-year reprieve where American attention is focused elsewhere. But this just delays the inevitable. And when the Civil War ends in 1865, the Americans return in force. Now they're bringing veterans, men who have seen real warfare, who understand discipline and tactics, who aren't intimidated by combat. They're bringing repeating rifles that can fire 16 shots without reloading. They're bringing improved artillery. They're bringing telegraphs that allow military coordination across thousands of miles. The technological gap that was already significant in 1854 has become a chasm by 1865, and they're bringing something else, a determination to end the Indian problem once and for all. Too many dead soldiers, too many disrupted supply lines, too much interference with manifest destiny. The debate in Washington isn't about whether to control the Plains tribes, it's about method. Do you force them onto reservations through military pressure? Do you sign treaties and then break them systematically? Do you kill the buffalo to destroy their economic base? Or do you do all of the above simultaneously? The Lakota see what's coming. They're not blind. The question dividing them is how to respond. Do you fight a war you probably can't win, but might win if the spirits favor you and the Americans tire of the cost? Or do you negotiate the best deal possible while you still have leverage and hope the Americans honor their promises this time? Red Cloud chooses to fight. From 1866 to 1868, he orchestrates the most successful Indian war against the United States, closing the Bozeman Trail through coordinated attacks that make travel suicidal. The Fetterman Massacre, where 81 soldiers are lured into an ambush and killed to the last man, proves that the Lakota can still win tactical victories against American forces when conditions favor them. But Red Cloud notices something crucial that many other chiefs miss. Every victory brings more soldiers with better weapons. The Fetterman fight brings howitzers and breech-loading rifles. The next fight will bring something worse. There's no final victory here, only an endless war of attrition that the Lakota cannot win. When the Americans offer peace in 1868, Red Cloud signs. The Treaty of Fort Laramie promises the Lakota ownership of the Black Hills and hunting rights across their traditional territories. American forts in Lakota territory will be abandoned. The Bozeman Trail will be closed. It looks like a Lakota victory. Sitting Bull calls Red Cloud a fool. The treaty is paper, he says. American promises are wind. The only thing the Americans understand is force, and once Red Cloud stops applying force, they'll break every promise they've made. Better to keep fighting. Better to die free than live as a reservation Indian, dependent on government rations. Stripped of dignity, the split between Red Cloud's diplomacy and Sitting Bull's resistance divides the Lakota at the worst possible moment. Just as they need unity, they fracture. Some bands move to reservations, accepting government rations and supervision. Other bands follow Sitting Bull into the wilderness, determined to maintain the old ways as long as possible. And then, in 1869, the Transcontinental Railroad is completed. Now soldiers can move from coast to coast in days instead of months. Now supplies can flow west in unlimited quantities. Now the industrial might of the entire United States can be brought to bear on the Plains tribes. The Iron Road has pierced the sacred hoop, and everything the Lakota have built, everything they've become, is about to be tested in ways that warrior courage alone cannot overcome. July 28, 1864. The sun rises over the Badlands of what will someday be North Dakota, and neither side knows they're about to fight the battle that will change everything. Not the biggest battle, not the most famous, but the one that will teach the Lakota a lesson about modern warfare so brutal, so undeniable, that it will echo through every decision they make for the next 30 years. General Alfred Sully commands 2,200 soldiers. Let me break down what that means in practical terms. The 6th Iowa Cavalry, the 2nd Minnesota Cavalry, infantry from Nebraska and Dakota territories, and critically 12-pound mountain howitzers. These aren't the biggest cannon in the American arsenal. They're designed to be broken down and carried by mules through mountain terrain. But to warriors who have never experienced artillery fire, they might as well be the wrath of God made metal. Sully's supply train stretches for miles behind his fighting force. Wagons full of ammunition, food, medical supplies, spare equipment. It's a moving city of destruction, and it moves with the methodical inevitability of industrial warfare. The soldiers are mostly Civil War veterans now. Men who have seen Shiloh, Antietam, Gettysburg. Men who understand that war isn't about individual glory. It's about organized killing on an industrial scale. The scouts report back to Sully about what lies ahead, and what they describe makes him smile. The largest gathering of Lakota, Dakota, and Nakota peoples ever assembled in one place. Over 6,000 people, perhaps 1,600 warriors. The numbers are estimates. Nobody's counting precisely, but everyone agrees this is enormous. Bands that normally spread across hundreds of miles have come together for the summer buffalo hunt and for mutual protection against American aggression. The camp spreads across the broken landscape near Killdeer Mountain. And let's be clear about what this camp represents. It's not a military encampment. It's families, women working buffalo hides in the morning sun, children playing along Killdeer Creek, old people sitting in the shade telling stories. Warriors, yes, but warriors who are part of a community, not a standing army. The warriors paint themselves that morning. Not because they expect battle necessarily, but because you always paint yourself properly when there might be conflict. Sacred symbols passed down through generations. Each warrior has his own designs given to him in visions, confirmed by medicine men, tested in previous battles. Red ochre for the earth, white clay for the spirits, charcoal for power. These aren't decorations. This is armor. Spiritual armor that has protected warriors for centuries. They wear their finest war shirts. Shirts adorned with hairlocks from enemies killed in battle. Shirts decorated with ermine tails and porcupine quill work. Shirts that tell the story of their deeds, that carry the medicine of their achievements. Some of these shirts have been in families for generations, worn by fathers and grandfathers who achieved glory. Now passed to sons and grandsons who will add their own deeds to the shirt's power. Inkpaduta is there, the feared Santee leader who led the Spirit Lake Massacre back in 1857. A man in his 50s now, scarred, brutal, uncompromising. He fought in the Minnesota Uprising of 1862, where Dakota warriors killed over 600 white settlers before being crushed by overwhelming force. Inkpaduta escaped, fled west, and he's been fighting ever since. He knows something about American warfare that the younger Lakota warriors don't yet understand. He tries to warn them about the cannon, about what artillery does to human bodies, about how distance becomes meaningless when shells can reach you before you hear them fired. The younger warriors listen politely and ignore him. They've heard stories about Inkpaduta's defeats, about how he retreated instead of fighting, about how he fears the Americans. They don't understand that experience should be respected, that survival sometimes requires acknowledging uncomfortable truths. When Sully's forces appear on the horizon, the warriors' reaction follows centuries of tradition. Hundreds of them stream out to meet the threat. They're singing death songs, songs that say, "Today is a good day to die," that they welcome death in battle as the highest honor. They're riding their best horses, animals trained for years, worth 20 regular horses, capable of responding to knee pressure alone so the rider's hands are free for weapons. Sitting Bull rides among them. He's in his early 30s, already respected as a warrior and beginning to develop a reputation as a man of vision. He carries his father's lance, a weapon that has killed enemies in a dozen battles. His face is painted with symbols that came to him in a Sundance vision. He's brave, skilled, confident, and he's about to learn that courage means nothing against industrial warfare. The warriors expect a traditional battle. Charges and countercharges. Individual combat where skill matters. A chance to count coup, to prove courage, to win glory. They fought this way against the Crow, the Pawnee, the Shoshone for generations. They fought this way against American soldiers in smaller engagements and held their own. Why should today be different? The first artillery shell answers that question with a sound that tears the sky apart. It's not like anything they've experienced. A rifle shot you can hear and identify. An arrow makes a whisper. But this is a scream that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere. A sound that bypasses your ears and hits your chest, your guts, your soul. The shell lands among a group of 30 warriors riding close together. The explosion is instantaneous. One moment there are 30 mounted warriors, proud men on beautiful horses, singing and ready for battle. The next moment there is nothing. Not bodies, not pieces of bodies. Just smoke and blood spray and a crater in the earth. The horses that aren't killed outright flee in mindless terror, dragging parts of their riders, shrieking in ways that horses shouldn't be able to shriek. The warriors who witness this, and hundreds of them do, because they're all advancing together, experience something beyond fear. It's cognitive dissonance so complete that their brains struggle to process what their eyes are seeing. Where did those men go? How can 30 warriors simply cease to exist? What kind of medicine can do this? More shells follow. The howitzers fire in sequence. Boom, 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 methodical as a heartbeat. Each shell travels in an arc too fast to track, lands among warriors or horses, and explodes with enough force to kill everything within 20 feet. A direct hit on a man doesn't leave a body to bury. It leaves scattered pieces, unidentifiable remains that were a person seconds before. Warriors who have faced death unflinchingly in 100 battles stand paralyzed. Some try to charge anyway, driven by courage that exceeds their comprehension. They're cut down by rifle fire before they close half the distance. Some try to flee and die with arrows in their backs, killed by their own people's tradition that running from battle is the deepest shame. Most mill around in confusion, their entire worldview shattering as completely as the bodies of their friends. Sitting Bull watches this horror unfold, and you can see his mind working through the implications. This isn't warfare. This is butchery. These soldiers don't want to prove their courage or test their skill. They want to kill Lakota from the maximum possible distance with the minimum possible risk. There's no honor here, no chance for glory. Just death arriving from beyond arrow range, invisible and unstoppable. He begins organizing a fighting retreat. It's one of the hardest things a warrior can do. Not flee in panic, but withdraw in order while still under fire. He's shouting orders, rallying warriors who want to charge to their deaths, trying to save what can be saved. And he's crying, not from fear, from rage and grief, and the crushing realization that everything he thought he knew about warfare is obsolete. The battle becomes a running fight across broken terrain. The Lakota warriors use their knowledge of the landscape, their superior horsemanship, their desperate courage to slow Sully's advance. They fight from ravines and hilltops, firing arrows and the few rifles they possess, making the Americans pay for every yard. But the artillery keeps firing, the shells keep falling, and warriors keep dying in ways that make a mockery of their preparation, their medicine, their courage. By afternoon, Sully's forces reach the main camp. The women and children have been fleeing since the battle started, but they can't move fast enough. Sully's cavalry catches some of them. What happens next follows the pattern established at Ash Hollow. Women die running, children die hiding in brush. The old and sick who can't flee die in their tippies. The warriors fight with the fury of men watching their families murdered, but fury isn't enough against artillery and repeating rifles. They make charge after charge, dying in dozens, killing soldiers here and there, but never enough to stop the advance. The mathematics of the battle are brutal. For every American soldier who falls, 5 warriors die. The Lakota are brave. The Americans are efficient. Bravery doesn't overcome efficiency when the technological gap is this wide. As evening approaches, the battle winds down, not because either side retreats, but because there's nothing left to fight over. The Lakota camp is destroyed, burned, everything the people owned, tons of dried buffalo meat, decorated teepees that took months to make, clothing, tools, sacred objects. It all burns in massive fires that send smoke columns into the sky, visible for 100 miles. The butcher's bill is devastating. Over 100 Lakota dead, with hundreds more wounded. Many of those wounded will die in the following days from injuries that would be survivable with proper medical care, but are fatal when you're fleeing across badlands with no supplies. Sully loses 2 men killed, 10 wounded. It's not a battle. It's not even a massacre. It's a demonstration of what happens when Stone Age tactics meet Industrial Age weapons. That night, in scattered camps across the Badlands, the survivors gather. Families find each other or discover they're alone. Children cry for parents who aren't coming back. Women keen the death songs for husbands and sons. Warriors sit in silence, staring at nothing, trying to process what they witnessed, sitting bull councils with other leaders, and the discussion is brutal. Some warriors want to gather every fighting man from every band and attack Sully's force in overwhelming numbers. Surely numbers can overcome technology. Surely enough brave men can defeat any enemy. Sitting Bull argues against this. He's done the mathematics in his head. Even if they gather 3,000 warriors, far more than they could actually assemble, and even if they accept 50% casualties, an unthinkable loss, they still might not defeat. Sully's combined arms force, other chiefs argue for negotiation. Go to the Americans. Make peace. Sign whatever papers they want signed. Accept reservation life if it means the cannons stop firing. Sitting Bull rejects this too. The Americans don't want peace, he says. They want submission. They want the Lakota to give up everything that makes them Lakota. Better to die free than live as a broken people on a reservation. His solution is harder to accept because it offers no glory and no immediate satisfaction. Avoid direct confrontation. Hit supply lines and isolated patrols. Make occupation so costly that the Americans give up and leave. Fight a guerrilla war using superior mobility and knowledge of terrain. Accept that the old ways of warfare, the charges, the coup counting, the individual glory, are suicide against American technology. Some chiefs call him a coward. Some say he's lost his courage at Killdeer Mountain. He bears their insults silently because he knows something they don't yet accept. The choice isn't between brave fighting and cowardly retreat. It's between smart fighting and extinction. The Americans have cannon that can kill 30 warriors with one shot. The Lakota have courage. Courage loses that fight every single time. In Sully's camp, the mood is satisfied but cautious. They've won a decisive victory with minimal casualties. They've destroyed enough supplies to hurt the Lakota through the coming winter. They've demonstrated American military superiority in ways that should convince the Indians to negotiate. But Sully is experienced enough to know this isn't over. Defeating an army in battle and conquering a people are different things. The Lakota will scatter now, regroup, adapt. This victory solves nothing permanently. The aftermath of Killdeer Mountain echoes through Lakota councils for years. It becomes the reference point for every strategic discussion. When young warriors propose attacking forts or supply trains, older men ask, do they have cannon? When debates arise about whether to negotiate or fight, someone mentions Killdeer Mountain. The battle becomes a touchstone, a before and after moment that divides Lakota military history into 2 eras. Before Killdeer Mountain, the Lakota believed their warrior medicine, their courage, their superior horsemanship could overcome any enemy. After Killdeer Mountain, they knew better. They knew the Americans fought a different kind of war. A war where distance negated courage, where technology trumped skill, where individual bravery meant nothing against coordinated firepower, but knowing you can't win a direct confrontation doesn't mean surrender. It means adaptation. And the Lakota, survivors of epidemics, masters of the horse revolution, conquerors of the plains, they know how to adapt. The question is whether they can adapt fast enough. Whether they can find strategies that work against industrial warfare before the Americans overwhelm them through sheer weight of numbers and resources. Sitting Bull rides away from Killdeer Mountain, a changed man. He's still brave, still committed to resistance, still convinced that Lakota freedom is worth dying for. But he's no longer foolish. He's seen what artillery does to human bodies. He's watched courage become irrelevant in the face of explosive shells. He's learned the hardest lesson of all, that some enemies can't be defeated through traditional means, that survival requires tactics that look like cowardice to those who don't understand the stakes. The thunder that once rolled free across the plains has met lightning from howitzer barrels. And thunder, for all its power, cannot stand against lightning when lightning comes from cannon that can kill from beyond sight, from beyond sound, from beyond any range where courage matters. The Lakota will keep fighting. They'll fight for 11 more years until the Little Bighorn, and even after that, scattered bands will resist into the 1880s. But Killdeer Mountain marks the moment when the outcome became inevitable, when the military balance shifted so decisively that no amount of courage could restore it. The councils that follow Killdeer Mountain are different from any the Lakota have held before. The optimism is gone. The easy confidence that warrior courage can overcome any challenge has died with those 100 warriors scattered across the Badlands. Now the question isn't whether the Lakota can defeat the Americans in battle, Killdeer Mountain answered that, but whether they can make resistance so costly that the Americans give up and leave them alone. Sitting Bull emerges from these councils as a new kind of leader, not the traditional war chief who leads by personal bravery in battle, though he's still brave, still respected as a fighter, something harder to define. A strategic thinker who understands that survival requires tactics that don't look heroic to those raised on stories of coup counting and death songs. He argues for a complete change in how the Lakota fight. No more mass charges against defended positions. No more attacking forts with cannon. No more giving the Americans the kind of set-piece battles where their technological advantages become overwhelming. Instead, hit supply trains when they're vulnerable. Attack isolated patrols. Ambush surveyors and railroad crews. Make every mile of American occupation cost blood and money. Make the price of conquest so high that eventually the Americans decide the plains aren't worth it. Some chiefs find this approach dishonorable. Where's the glory in attacking supply wagons? Where's the courage in avoiding direct confrontation? These are the tactics of coyotes, not warriors. Sitting Bull listens to these criticisms and doesn't argue. He just points out that the warriors who died at Killdeer Mountain were brave, that their courage was absolute, that they charged artillery shells singing death songs, and that they're all dead now, and their deaths changed nothing except leaving their families without protectors. The split between Sitting Bull's resistance and Red Cloud's diplomacy becomes formalized in these years. Red Cloud studies Sully's victory and draws his own conclusions, different from Sitting Bull's but equally pragmatic. From 1866 to 1868, Red Cloud orchestrates what historians will call the most successful Indian war against the United States, the campaign to close the Bozeman Trail. The Bozeman Trail cuts through the heart of prime Lakota hunting territory, connecting the Oregon Trail to the Montana goldfields. John Bozeman surveyed it in 1863, and by 1865, emigrants are using it despite Lakota objections. The Army builds 3 forts to protect travelers: Fort Reno, Fort Phil Kearny, and Fort C.F. Smith. Red Cloud sees these forts not as symbols of American power, but as isolated outposts vulnerable to siege. His strategy is brilliant in its simplicity. Don't attack the forts directly. They have cannon and defensive positions. Instead, cut them off. Kill or drive away anyone who ventures outside the walls. Destroy supply trains. Hunt all the game in the surrounding area so the soldiers have nothing to eat but their dwindling supplies. Make life inside the forts so miserable that soldiers desert and officers beg to be transferred. December 21st, 1866. Captain William Fetterman leads 80 men out of Fort Phil Kearny to rescue a wood-cutting party under attack. Fetterman has boasted that with 80 men, he could ride through the entire Sioux Nation. Now he has exactly 80 men, and he's about to discover what the Sioux Nation can do when it fights smart instead of brave. Crazy Horse leads a small group of warriors as decoys. They attack the wood cutrain, then retreat when Fetterman's force appears. Fetterman chases them, seeing what looks like an easy victory against a small group of fleeing Indians. He's been ordered not to pursue beyond Lodge Trail Ridge, but the warriors are right there, almost within rifle range, taunting him. He crosses the ridge. On the other side, 2,000 Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho warriors have been waiting in perfect silence. The ambush springs with the precision of a trap, perfected through planning and discipline. Fetterman's entire command, all 81 men, including Fetterman himself, die in less than an hour. Not one escapes. When recovery parties find the bodies, they've been stripped and mutilated, left as a message about what happens when Americans violate Lakota territory. Red Cloud understands this victory's significance immediately. It's not the casualty count, though 81 dead soldiers is the worst American defeat on the plains to that point. It's the psychological impact. The American public reads about annihilated commands and questions whether controlling the Bozeman Trail is worth the cost. The Army realizes that protecting the trail requires more soldiers than they're willing to commit. The mathematics of occupation start working against American expansion. For 2 more years, Red Cloud maintains pressure on the Bozeman Trail forts. Not through dramatic battles, but through relentless harassment. Woodcutting parties get attacked. Supply trains get raided. Soldiers who wander too far from the forts disappear. The cost of keeping those 3 forts operational becomes absurd. Thousands of soldiers tied down to protect a trail that emigrants are too frightened to use. But Red Cloud notices something that troubles him deeply. Every victory brings better American responses. After Fetterman, the Army issues new breech-loading rifles. After his warriors attack another woodcutting party, the wagon box fight, they encounter soldiers with repeating rifles who can fire so fast the warriors can't rush them between reloads. Each tactical success produces strategic problems because the Americans learn and adapt and improve their equipment. In 1868, the Americans offer peace. The Treaty of Fort Laramie promises the Lakota ownership of the Black Hills and hunting rights across their traditional territories. The Bozeman Trail forts will be abandoned. The trail will be closed. American civilians will be prohibited from entering Lakota territory without permission. It looks like everything Red Cloud fought for. He signs. The forts are abandoned. Red Cloud's bands move to the reservation. And Sitting Bull, watching from the northern plains, calls him a fool. Not because Red Cloud lacked courage, his military campaign was masterful, but because Sitting Bull understands something about American promises that Red Cloud still hopes might be honored. The treaty is paper. American promises are wind. The words written on that treaty mean nothing if the American government decides to break them. And Sitting Bull knows the Americans will break them. Not immediately, not obviously, but slowly, through incremental violations, through reinterpreting clauses, through pretending that mineral rights don't count as territorial sovereignty when gold is discovered in the Black Hills. Red Cloud's surrender, and it is a surrender, regardless of how favorable the treaty looks, divides the Lakota at the worst possible moment. Some bands follow Red Cloud to the reservation, accepting government rations and supervision. They're betting on peace, on the Americans honoring their word, on being able to maintain some version of Lakota life within the reservation system. They're exhausted by war. They've seen too many people die. They want to believe peace is possible. Other bands follow Sitting Bull into the unceded territory north of the Platte River. They're determined to maintain the old ways as long as possible, to hunt buffalo without American interference, to raise their children as Lakota, to live free or die trying. They know this can't last forever. The American pressure is too great, the resources too unbalanced. But they'll resist until resistance becomes literally impossible, and then the Transcontinental Railroad is completed in 1869. Golden Spike driven at Promontory Summit, coast to coast by rail. The strategic implications are immediate and devastating. Before the railroad, moving troops from the East Coast to the plains took months. Supply lines stretched for thousands of miles. Military campaigns were limited by weather and distance, and the physical limitations of horses and wagons. Now, soldiers can move from New York to Wyoming in a week. Supplies can flow west in unlimited quantities. The entire industrial capacity of the United States, the factories, the foundries, the armories, can support planes' military operations without significant difficulty. Distance, which has always been the Lakota's greatest defensive asset, ceases to matter. The systematic destruction of the buffalo herds begins not as random hunting, but as deliberate military strategy. General Philip Sheridan, the man who said, "The only good Indians I ever saw were dead," understands what Sitting Bull knows. The buffalo are the foundation of Plains Indian life. Economic foundation, spiritual foundation, cultural foundation. Kill the buffalo and you destroy Indian independence without firing a shot. Sheridan tells Congress, let them kill, skin, and sell until the buffalo is exterminated. Then your prairies can be covered with speckled cattle and the festive cowboy. It's a policy of ecological warfare, and it's devastatingly effective. Professional hide hunters with high-powered Sharps rifles fan out across the plains. These aren't subsistence hunters. They're industrial killers, paid by the hide, capable of shooting 100 buffalo per day. They take the hide and maybe the tongue. Buffalo tongue is a delicacy in Eastern restaurants. Everything else they leave to rot. The carcasses pile up. Millions of dead buffalo rotting on the plains, creating a stench you can smell for miles, attracting wolves and vultures, testifying to waste on a scale that seems designed to mock the Lakota's respectful relationship with the buffalo. Sitting Bull's bands watch this slaughter with mounting horror and rage. The buffalo aren't just animals. They're relatives. They're the gift that makes plains life possible. The thought of killing them for their hides and leaving the meat to rot, it's not just wasteful, it's blasphemous. It's a violation of the fundamental relationship between the people and the animal beings that sustain them. His warriors start attacking hide hunters wherever they find them. This isn't warfare by any legal definition. These are civilian hunters with government permits. But Sitting Bull doesn't recognize those permits, doesn't accept that the American government has the right to issue permits to kill buffalo on Lakota land. The hide hunters die hard. They're well-armed, experienced frontiersmen who know how to shoot. But they die nonetheless, and their deaths send a message that might doesn't make right, except it does make right, at least in this world at this time. The American army protects the hide hunters, sends patrols to escort them, establishes military posts near prime hunting areas. The hunters continue their work, and the buffalo herds shrink year by year. Millions become hundreds of thousands. Hundreds of thousands become tens of thousands. The great herds that darkened the earth from horizon to horizon begin to fragment, to disappear. When surveyors for the Northern Pacific Railroad enter Lakota territory in 1872, Sitting Bull personally leads attacks that turn their scientific instruments into scrap metal. He understands what railroads mean even better now, after watching what the Transcontinental Railroad did to limit Lakota options. The Northern Pacific will cut through the heart of remaining buffalo territory, dividing the herds, bringing thousands of settlers, establishing the infrastructure for permanent American occupation. His warriors harass the surveyors relentlessly, steal their horses, burn their equipment, kill them when opportunities arise. The railroad company hires military escorts, so the Lakota fight running battles with cavalry units protecting civilians with surveying equipment. It's guerrilla warfare at its purest. Strike fast, inflict casualties, retreat before the Americans can bring their firepower to bear. And it works. Temporarily. The Northern Pacific Railroad construction slows. Investors get nervous about building through hostile territory. The project stalls for several years. But Sitting Bull knows these are delays, not victories. The railroad will come eventually. The question is how much time he can buy and what his people can do with that time. The visions continue. In Sundance ceremonies, pierced and dancing, staring at the sun until reality and spirit merge. Sitting Bull sees soldiers falling upside down into his camp like grasshoppers from the sky. He sees victory. He sees triumph. But he also sees darkness after the victory. His people scattered, the buffalo gone, the old ways dying. The visions are contradictory, confusing. He doesn't know how to interpret them, whether they promise hope or warn of tragedy. What he does know with certainty is that reservation life means death. Maybe not physical death immediately, but the death of everything that makes the Lakota who they are. He's visited the agencies where Red Cloud's people live. He's seen warriors reduced to standing in line for government rations of flour and beef. He's seen people who once ranged across thousands of miles, confined to bounded territory, watched by agents who treat them like children or criminals. He's seen the deadness in their eyes, so he keeps fighting. Not with the optimism of warriors who charged at Killdeer Mountain believing courage would prevail. With the grim determination of a man who knows he's probably going to lose, but fights anyway, because submission is worse than death. His followers understand this. They're not fools. They know the mathematics of the situation, but they choose freedom measured in months or years over security that requires giving up their identity. By 1875, maybe 7,000 Indians still follow Sitting Bull, scattered across the unceded territory, in bands that gather and separate with the seasons. The Americans want them on reservations where they can be controlled, where they can't raid, where they can be civilized. They send messengers offering peace, threatening war. Sitting Bull's response is always the same: come and take us. The Americans are preparing to do exactly that. The discovery of gold in the Black Hills in 1874 has made the Treaty of Fort Laramie inconvenient. American miners are flooding into territory the treaty explicitly reserves for the Lakota. The government tries to buy the Black Hills, offering money that Sitting Bull won't accept because the Black Hills aren't his to sell. They belong to the spirits, to the ancestors, to the people as a whole. The stage is set for the final confrontation. The Americans are assembling the largest military force they've deployed on the plains. Thousands of soldiers, experienced commanders, modern weapons. Their orders are simple: force the non-reservation Indians onto reservations by whatever means necessary. Grant them one final chance to come in peacefully. Then hunt them down. Sitting Bull knows they're coming. His scouts report troop movements, supply buildups, the unmistakable signs of a major campaign. He calls for his people to gather, to combine their strength for what's coming. And they come. Lakota, Cheyenne, Arapaho, thousands of warriors responding to his call, determined to make one final stand for the old ways. The thunder that learned hard lessons at Killdeer Mountain is about to roll again, one last time, in the valley of the Little Bighorn, June 25th, 1876. The valley of the Little Bighorn River, the largest gathering of Plains Indians in history, possibly 6,000 people, maybe 2,000 warriors, camped along the river, confident in their strength. George Armstrong Custer leads the 7th Cavalry toward them, divided his force into 3 columns, believing he's chasing a fleeing enemy. Within hours, Custer and 268 soldiers will be dead, and the Lakota and Cheyenne will win the most complete tactical victory any Indian force ever achieves against the United States Army. I'm not going to detail the battle itself. That's been done to death, mythologized, analyzed, argued over by historians for 150 years. What matters for our story is what happens after. Because the Little Bighorn victory seals the Lakota's fate more surely than any defeat could have. The American response is immediate and overwhelming. The newspapers scream for revenge. Congress authorizes whatever force is necessary to crush the hostile tribes. General Sherman, the man who burned Atlanta, who understands total war, is given free rein to finish the Plains Indians once and for all. The army sends thousands of additional troops. They hunt the scattered bands through winter, attacking camps in weather so brutal that Indian ponies die by the hundreds, and warriors can barely hold their weapons. Sitting Bull leads his people north across the Medicine Line into Canada, seeking sanctuary with the grandmother's government, Queen Victoria. The Canadian authorities are sympathetic but clear. They'll provide refuge, but no support. The Lakota must feed themselves, must stay peaceful, must not raid south across the border. It seems workable at first, but buffalo don't recognize international borders, and the herds are dying everywhere now. By 1878, buffalo in Canada are nearly extinct. The people Sitting Bull led to freedom are starving. Children cry from hunger. The old and sick begin dying not from violence, but from malnutrition, from diseases that wouldn't kill them if they had proper food. Sitting Bull watches his people wither and realizes that exile is just another form of death. In 1881, he surrenders. Not through military defeat. The Canadian Mounties never force him out. Through starvation, through the slow horror of watching children die from hunger. He crosses back into the United States, turns himself in at Fort Buford, hands over his rifle. He's 49 years old. For 15 years, he's been the symbol of Lakota resistance. Now he's a prisoner, though the Americans don't call it that. The reservation system that awaits him is designed to break Indian identity as thoroughly as the buffalo slaughter broke their economy. It's psychological warfare more devastating than anything Sully or Custer ever inflicted. The agents forbid the sun dance, the central ceremony of Lakota spiritual life. They forbid the speaking of Lakota language. They forbid traditional medicine practices. Everything that makes a Lakota person Lakota is now illegal. Children are the special target. Starting in the 1870s, Indian children are taken from their families and sent to boarding schools. Places like the Carlisle Indian Industrial School in Pennsylvania, founded by Richard Pratt, whose motto is, "Kill the Indian, save the man." Let that sink in for a moment. The explicit stated goal is to kill the Indian identity. At these schools, children's hair is cut, a violation of deep spiritual significance in Lakota culture, where hair carries prayers and connects you to the earth. Their names are changed. Wind Rider becomes John Smith. They're forbidden to speak Lakota. If they're caught speaking their language, their mouths are washed with lye soap. The physical pain is bad enough. The message that your language is dirty, that your culture is shameful, that everything your parents taught you is wrong, that destroys souls in ways violence never could. The children who survive these schools, and many don't. Disease runs rampant through dormitories where kids from 100 different tribes are crammed together, returned to reservations as strangers. They can't speak to their grandparents anymore. They've forgotten ceremonies. They've been taught that progress means abandoning everything Indian. Some of them believe it. Some of them become bitter, angry at both worlds, belonging to neither. Some of them remember just enough to know what was stolen, but not enough to reconstruct what was lost. Sitting Bull, forced to support his family somehow, accepts an offer to tour with Buffalo Bill's Wild West show. Imagine this. The man who never signed away Lakota land, who led at the Little Bighorn, who represented everything untamed and unconquerable about the Plains Indians. Now he's performing his culture's death for cheering crowds. He rides around the arena in his war bonnet. Crowds take photographs. The great chief, they say, pointing and clicking cameras. The savage who killed Custer, now tamed and civilized. He does it for money, for food, to keep his family from starving. And every performance tears something from his soul. But this is what survival looks like now. Not dramatic resistance, not glorious death in battle. Just the slow, grinding degradation of doing whatever you must to keep breathing one more day. Back on the reservations, despair settles like a physical weight. The buffalo are gone. By 1883, the great herds are extinct, except for a few hundred animals in protected areas. The land the treaties promised is being stolen piece by piece through the Dawes Act, which divides communal tribal land into individual plots and opens the surplus to white settlement. The agents are corrupt, stealing rations and selling them for personal profit while people starve. The dream of maintaining any version of traditional Lakota life has died. And then, in 1889, a Paiute prophet named Wovoka has a vision. During a solar eclipse, he says he died and went to heaven. There he met the Christian God. Remember, by this point many Indians have been exposed to Christianity, often forcibly. God showed him a new world coming, a world where the buffalo return, where the dead come back to life, where the white people vanish like morning mist and Indians live again, as they did before everything changed. There's a ceremony to bring this world into being, a dance, the ghost dance. Participants wear special shirts painted with sacred symbols. They dance in circles, sometimes for hours, until exhaustion brings visions. They sing songs about the dead returning, about the earth renewing, about the buffalo covering the plains again. If enough people dance, if enough people believe, if the ceremony is done correctly, the new world will come. The ghost dance spreads across reservations like wildfire. Desperate people grasp at hope, even when logic says it's impossible. Lakota delegations travel to Nevada to meet Wovoka, to learn the dance, to bring it back to their people. By 1890, thousands of Lakota are dancing. They believe. They need to believe, because the alternative, accepting that this reservation life is all that remains forever, that's more than human beings can bear. Sitting Bull is skeptical. He's seen too much, lived too long, fought too hard to think that dancing can undo what cannons and railroads and buffalo hunters have done. But he's also unwilling to deny his people even false comfort. When ghost dancers gather at his camp, he allows it, protects them, tells the agents to leave them alone. If his people need to dance, let them dance. What harm can it do? The Indian agents see it differently. They see thousands of Indians gathering, dancing, talking about a world without white people. They see the ghost dance shirts that supposedly stop bullets. Never mind that the dancers aren't threatening anyone, aren't preparing for war, are in fact explicitly peaceful. The agents see unity. They see movement. They see Indians acting according to their own will rather than agent control. And that terrifies them. They call for military intervention. The army, still embarrassed by the Little Bighorn 14 years earlier, is eager to demonstrate its complete control over the reservations. They decide Sitting Bull is the problem, that if they arrest him, the ghost dance will collapse. They send Indian police, Lakota men who have accepted agency authority, who serve the agents against their own people. The decision to use Indian police rather than soldiers is calculated. Let Indians kill Indians. Let the conquered police the conquered. December 15th, 1890. Before dawn, 43 Lakota policemen surround Sitting Bull's cabin on the Standing Rock Reservation. It's cold, dark. They bang on the door. Sitting Bull, woken from sleep, comes out confused. He's 59 years old, tired. Not the warrior who charged howitzer shells at Killdeer Mountain, not the leader who defied the Americans for 2 decades. Just an old man in a nightshirt, wondering why police are at his door before sunrise. The police say he's under arrest. Orders from the agent. He needs to come to the agency headquarters. Sitting Bull says he'll come, but needs to dress first. His followers are gathering now, men who have been sleeping near his cabin, drawn by the commotion. They're angry, shouting at the police, calling them traitors, saying they won't let the agents take Sitting Bull. The tension escalates. The police try to move Sitting Bull toward their wagon. His followers press closer. Someone fires a shot. Accounts differ on who, why, whether it was accidental or intentional. But once the first shot sounds, everything explodes. The police and Sitting Bull's followers are shooting at each other at point-blank range in the pre-dawn darkness. Red Tomahawk, a Lakota policeman, shoots Sitting Bull in the back of the head. The man who survived Killdeer Mountain, who led at the Little Bighorn, who never signed a treaty selling Lakota land, who represented everything proud and unconquerable about his people, he dies in the mud outside his cabin, killed by his own people, by Lakota men turned against their own leader, by the ultimate victory of American policy, getting Indians to do the dirty work of conquest. 7 of Sitting Bull's followers die in the fight. 6 police die. The shooting stops when there's no one left to shoot. The police withdraw with their dead, leaving Sitting Bull's body lying where it fell. His people eventually recover it, prepare it according to tradition, bury it. But something more than a man died that morning. The last symbol of successful Lakota resistance is gone. 2 weeks later, December 29th, 1890, Wounded Knee Creek on the Pine Ridge Reservation. Bigfoot's band of ghost dancers, about 350 people, mostly women and children, are surrounded by 500 soldiers of the 7th Cavalry. Custer's old regiment. The soldiers have 4 Hotchkiss guns positioned on the surrounding hills. Rapid-fire artillery that can pump explosive shells at 50 rounds per minute. The soldiers are nervous. They've heard about the ghost dance. They believe the shirts stop bullets. They're afraid these Indians might try to fight their way out. They demand the band surrender all weapons. Warriors reluctantly hand over rifles, mostly old ones, keeping the good weapons hidden because giving up all your weapons means becoming completely defenseless. The soldiers search teepees, looking for hidden weapons. They're rough, invasive, throwing people's possessions into the dirt. An old warrior named Black Coyote refuses to give up his rifle. He's deaf. He doesn't understand what's happening. The soldiers grab for his gun. It fires accidentally, most witnesses say, maybe intentionally. Does it matter? The Hotchkiss guns open up. 50 explosive shells per minute, pouring into a crowd of men, women, and children at point-blank range. The soldiers fire indiscriminately into the chaos. People run and die running. They hide in ravines and die hiding. Mothers cover their children with their bodies and die together with their children. The ghost dance shirts don't stop bullets. They never could. They were hope-made cloth, and hope dies at Wounded Knee just as surely as nearly 300 Lakota. The soldiers pursue fleeing Indians for miles, shooting them down. They find women and children hiding in brush and kill them, not because they're armed, not because they're fighting back, but because they're there, because they're Indian, because 14 years of resentment over the Little Bighorn finally finds expression in massacre. A blizzard moves in that night, burying the dead in grotesque positions across the snow. When a burial party returns days later to collect the bodies, they find them frozen solid. An old woman sitting upright, children clutched in their mother's arms, warriors who died crawling toward the soldiers. The burial crew throws them into a mass grave, takes photographs that will shock people who see them, but won't bring anyone back to life. The ghost dance dies at Wounded Knee, not because the ceremony is forbidden, though it is, but because the promise it made has been proven false in the most brutal way possible. The shirts don't stop bullets. Dancing doesn't bring back the buffalo. The dead don't rise. The white people don't vanish. There is no new world coming. There is only this world, this reservation world, where starvation and disease and despair are the constant companions of conquered peoples. The 19th century ends with the Lakota at their lowest point. Population decimated, from perhaps 20,000 in 1850 to maybe 10,000 by 1900, and many of those are sick, malnourished, traumatized. Culture outlawed. You can't speak your language, can't practice your ceremonies, can't raise your children as Lakota without government interference. Children lost, taken to boarding schools where they're beaten for being Indian, where they forget who they are. Sacred sites turn to tourist attractions, white settlers picnicking in the Black Hills, mining companies digging up the earth, ranchers running cattle across land that treaties promised to the Lakota forever. Sitting Bull is dead. Crazy Horse was killed by a soldier's bayonet in 1877 while in army custody. Red Cloud lives on the reservation, old and compromised, his great victory at the Bozeman Trail seeming increasingly irrelevant. The warriors who charged artillery at Killdeer Mountain are dead, or old men living on memories. The children who grew up free on the plains are raising grandchildren who've never seen a buffalo, never lived in a teepee, never experienced anything but reservation life. The thunder that once rolled across the plains has been silenced. The sacred hoop is broken. The people are scattered, broken, seemingly destroyed. Every physical measure says the Americans have won completely. They've taken the land, killed the buffalo, confined the people, outlawed the culture. What more could conquest achieve? And yet, In hidden places, grandmothers whisper forbidden stories to children after the agents have gone home. Medicine bundles pass from keeper to keeper in darkness, preserved despite the risk. The language survives in lullabies, sung when no one is listening. The ceremonies continue in secret, incomplete and fragmented, but not entirely lost. Some things cannot be killed, only driven underground. Some fires cannot be extinguished, only banked, waiting for wind to blow them back to life. The Lakota have survived smallpox epidemics that killed half their people. They've survived the buffalo extinction. They've survived Killdeer Mountain and Little Bighorn and Wounded Knee. They've survived boarding schools and starvation and systematic cultural destruction. Survival doesn't look like victory. It looks like endurance. But endurance is its own form of resistance. The question is whether they can endure long enough for the world to change again. Whether some future generation might find a way to be Lakota in a world that has done everything possible to make that impossible. The 20th century dawns with the Lakota at their nadir. Everything that can be taken has been taken. Everything that can be outlawed has been outlawed. Everything that can be destroyed has been destroyed. The American government's official policy is assimilation, not just in practice, but explicitly stated. Indians as Indians are supposed to disappear, become Americans, forget their languages, their ceremonies, their identities, accept that their culture was primitive, their resistance was futile, and their future lies in complete surrender to American civilization. It doesn't work. And the reasons it doesn't work tell us something profound about human resilience. In hidden places, the culture survives. Grandmothers tell stories in Lakota when no agents are listening. They're careful, they're quiet, but they don't stop. A 5-year-old child in 1900 hearing creation stories in the old language. That child becomes a grandmother in 1960, telling the same stories to her grandchildren. The chain isn't broken, it's strained to the breaking point. Links are missing, but it holds. Medicine bundles pass from keeper to keeper. These aren't museum pieces. They're living spiritual objects that require proper care, proper ceremony, proper respect. Keeping them is illegal. Showing them to outsiders violates their sanctity. But they survive because people risk punishment to maintain the traditions. A man might spend a year in jail for practicing traditional medicine. His son sees this sacrifice and understands that some things are worth suffering for. The language survives in ways the boarding school architects never anticipated. Yes, children are beaten for speaking Lakota in the schools. Yes, a generation grows up ashamed of their native tongue. But language lives in grandparents who refuse to speak English, lives in ceremonies conducted in secret, lives in songs that can only be sung in Lakota because the meaning is embedded in the words themselves. Untranslatable, and here's what the assimilationists didn't count on. Some of the boarding school children come back angry, not broken, not assimilated, angry. They've seen how white people live, how they think, how their systems work, and they return to reservations with a new kind of knowledge. They understand American law, American politics, American weaknesses. They become lawyers, teachers, activists who can fight the system using its own weapons. World War I changes things in ways nobody expects. The army needs soldiers, and Indians volunteer in disproportionate numbers. Young Lakota men go to France and fight with distinction. They're scouts, code talkers, assault troops. They discover that Europeans respect them as warriors in ways Americans never have. French and British soldiers don't see them as inferior. They see them as soldiers, as equals, as men. These veterans returned to reservations in 1918 and 1919 with new ideas. They fought for democracy abroad. They've seen the world beyond South Dakota. They've proven themselves in the most brutal warfare humanity has ever devised. And they come back to reservations where they can't vote, can't own land, can't even leave without permission from an Indian agent. The contradiction becomes impossible to ignore. The Indian Citizenship Act of 1924 grants citizenship to all Indians born in the United States. It's meant to be the final step in assimilation. Now you're citizens, now you have no excuse not to integrate fully into American society. But it backfires spectacularly. Because citizenship means rights, constitutional rights, legal standing to sue, political power to organize. The very laws meant to eliminate Indian identity become tools for defending it. Lakota lawyers start filing lawsuits in the 1930s and 40s. They dig out old treaties and point to specific violations. The Black Hills case begins its long journey through courts. The argument is simple. The Treaty of Fort Laramie in 1868 gave the Black Hills to the Lakota. The American government seized them in 1877 without proper compensation. This is theft, and American law recognizes property rights, even for Indians, even for land taken 100 years ago. The case drags through courts for decades. Finally, in 1980, the Supreme Court rules that the taking of the Black Hills was illegal and awards compensation, $106 million, which with interest has grown to over $1 billion. It's the largest award in American history to an Indian tribe. The Lakota refuse it. Every year, the United States government renews the offer. Every year, the Lakota say no. The Black Hills are not for sale, they say, echoing Sitting Bull's words from a century before. Money can't compensate for sacred land. You don't put a price on the heart of your world. The $1 billion sits in an account growing untouched. A statement that some things matter more than money. That survival isn't just physical, it's spiritual. That being Lakota means maintaining connections to land and history that capitalism can't comprehend. The 1970s bring a new militancy. The American Indian movement forms, led partly by Lakota activists who are done asking politely for rights. They occupy Wounded Knee in 1973, not accidentally choosing the site of the 1890 massacre. For 71 days, they hold off federal marshals and FBI agents. It's not warfare like Killdeer Mountain. They're not charging artillery, but they're making the same statement Sitting Bull made. We're still here. We're still resisting. You haven't broken us. The occupation ends with arrests, with trials, with some activists spending years in prison. But it achieves something important. It brings international attention to ongoing injustices. It shows young Lakota people that resistance is still possible, that their history isn't just tragic, but heroic, that they come from warriors who never quit fighting. Not at Killdeer Mountain. Not at Wounded Knee, not ever. Language revitalization efforts begin in earnest. Lakota immersion schools open where children learn in their native tongue, from kindergarten through high school. It's painstaking work, finding fluent speakers to teach, most of them elderly. Developing curriculum materials, fighting school boards and state governments that don't understand why anyone would teach a dead language. But the work continues because language carries worldview, carries culture, carries identity in ways that can't be preserved any other way. The Sun Dance returns openly. Through the 20th century, it continued in secret, with trusted participants in hidden locations. But by the 1980s and 90s, Sun Dances happened publicly on reservations. Thousands attend. Young men pierce their flesh and dance, connecting to traditions that boarding schools tried to erase. The ceremony adapts to modern realities. Some participants drive to the dance ground in pickup trucks, check cell phones between sessions, but the core remains unchanged. Today, Standing Rock Reservation becomes the site of the largest Native American resistance in a century. 2016. The Dakota Access Pipeline is being built to carry oil from North Dakota to Illinois. The route crosses the Missouri River just upstream from Standing Rock, threatening the tribe's water supply. More than threatening, guaranteeing contamination if the pipeline ever leaks, which pipelines inevitably do. The Lakota say no. They establish camps along the pipeline route. Water protectors, they call themselves, not protesters. Because they're protecting water, protecting land, protecting a future for their children. The movement grows. Thousands arrive. Indigenous peoples from across North America and beyond. Environmental activists, veterans. People who see Standing Rock as a symbol of resistance to corporate power and environmental destruction. The response is militarized police using tactics that look like warfare. water cannons in freezing weather, rubber bullets, attack dogs, tear gas. Images circulate globally of unarmed water protectors facing armed police in military gear. The contrast is stark, people protecting water versus people protecting oil profits. The moral clarity is undeniable. The water protectors face the same question, sitting bull-faced after Killdeer Mountain. Do you keep fighting when the odds are overwhelming? Do you make stands you'll probably lose because some things matter more than winning? The camps last for months. Winter comes. The police blockade supplies. The government issues eviction orders. Eventually, the camps are cleared. The pipeline is completed. But something else happens. Millions of people worldwide watch Standing Rock and understand something about ongoing colonization, about indigenous resistance, about water as a human right, more fundamental than property rights. Imniwikoni, water is life, becomes a global rallying cry. The Lakota lose the immediate battle but win something larger. They remind the world that they're still here, still fighting, still defending land and water and future generations. Young Lakota today navigate two worlds. They graduate from universities with degrees in law, medicine, engineering. They work jobs in cities far from reservations. They use technology, speak English, participate in American culture. But many also speak Lakota, attend sun dances, maintain connections to land and tradition. They're creating something new, not the pre-contact culture, which is impossible to fully recreate, but a living culture that honors the past while adapting to present realities. Reservation life remains difficult. Poverty rates are staggering. Unemployment reaches 50% in some areas. Healthcare is inadequate. The legacy of historical trauma manifests in addiction, suicide, family violence. These aren't character flaws. They're the predictable results of systematic cultural destruction, intergenerational trauma, ongoing economic marginalization. Understanding this doesn't solve it, but it's the first step towards solutions. But there's also renewal. Basketball tournaments on reservations draw thousands, with young athletes playing with intensity that channels warrior traditions into new forms. Powwows celebrate survival with dancing that connects to centuries of tradition while incorporating new styles, new music, new expressions. Young people reclaim their names in Lakota that connect them to ancestors, to the land, to identities deeper than anything American culture offers. The Black Hills remain stolen. The buffalo are gone from most of their range, though small herds exist now on some tribal lands. The reservations are a fraction of the territory promised by treaties. Most of the injustices that drove Sitting Bull to resistance remain unresolved. By any objective measure, the American conquest was successful, and its effects persist. But the Lakota survive. That's not nothing. In 1600, they were forest people harvesting wild rice. By 1750, they were masters of the plains. By 1900, they were supposedly dying out, culturally exterminated, existing only as tragic historical footnotes. But here in 2025, Lakota people are speaking their language, dancing their ceremonies, raising children who know who they are and where they come from. The thunder that rolled across the plains at Killdeer Mountain never actually stopped. It just changed form. It sounds now in powwow drums, in courtroom arguments, in children learning their language, in water protectors facing police lines. It sounds in every Lakota person who refuses to be invisible, who claims their identity despite every historical pressure to abandon it, who looks at $1 billion settlement offer and says, the Black Hills aren't for sale. Sitting Bull was right about American promises. The treaties were broken exactly as he predicted, but he was wrong about one thing. He thought his people might not survive. He couldn't imagine a world where being Lakota meant something different than it did in his time, but still meant something real, still connected to the same spiritual traditions, still carried the same fierce pride. The cannon at Killdeer Mountain killed 30 warriors in an instant. The artillery at Wounded Knee killed 300 in minutes. But they couldn't kill what those warriors carried, the spirit that says we're Lakota, we're still here, we haven't quit, we won't quit. That spirit survived boarding schools, starvation, cultural suppression, everything conquest could inflict. And it survives today in every person who claims that identity, who learns that language, who fights for that land and water. The story that began in Minnesota forests 600 years ago hasn't ended. It's changed, transformed, adapted to circumstances that would have been unimaginable to the people harvesting wild rice in 1600. But it continues. The thunder still rolls. And as long as Lakota people exist who remember their history, honor their ancestors, and refuse to surrender their identity, it always will. From the sacred waters where the journey began, through the golden age on the plains, through the catastrophes of conquest and the long night of suppression, to today's struggles and renewals, the Lakota endure. Not as museum pieces, not as historical relics, but as living people with a living culture, still fighting for land and water and future generations, still being Lakota in a world that spent centuries trying to make that impossible. The thunder has been transformed, but not silenced. And that, more than any military victory or defeat, is what matters. The people survive. The culture survives. The struggle continues. And the story is not finished.